Good day, Crime Talk aficionados. It is Sunday, and that means it's ready for the weekly recap of all the top stories that we gave to you throughout the week in one convenient location right here. All right, remember, for those internet trolls that want to say, didn't I see this already? It's the weekly recap of all of the big stories throughout the week. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. And never forget, the Constitution matters. Unveiling that enigma of Bryan Kohberger, right? His academic insights, the 3D house model, and the shadows of the Idaho murders. An enigma indeed. Some may say, oh, Scott, what's an enigma? An enigma is something or someone that is mysterious, puzzling, or difficult to understand. Obviously refers to a person or situation that presents a riddle or conundrum, often due to complexity, ambiguity, or obscure nature. And it can also denote a paradox or something that defies clear explanation despite efforts to comprehend it. Kind of sounds like Bryan Kohberger, doesn't it? So, in the realm of true crime, few cases captivate and unsettle as profoundly as the 2022 University of Idaho murders, where Ethan Chapin, Xana Kernodle, Madison Mogen, and Kaylee Gonzalez were brutally slain in their off-campus home. Now, at the center of this tragedy obviously stands Bryan Kohberger, the former criminology student at Washington State University. He was charged with those 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of burglary, and drawing from recently released police records, Kohberger's own academic work, a detailed term paper on crime scene processing and court proceedings surrounding a 3D model of the crime scene, we're going to explore kind of the chilling juxtaposition between his scholarly pursuits and the innovative trial preparations and the allegations against him. All right, so let's talk about a quick snapshot of the horror of this entire case and the investigation. All right. So for those who aren't familiar with the case, the murders occurred in the early hours of November 13th of 2022 at the 1122 King Road there in Moscow, Idaho. Now, Kohberger was arrested in December of 2022 in Pennsylvania and ultimately pled guilty to the charges on July 2nd. Of this year. He accepted a plea deal that resulted in 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, avoiding a trial and a death penalty. Police records unsealed through subpoenas from institutions like Washington State University and DeSalle University reveal insight into Kohberger's academic and personal life, while court documents detail the meticulous preparation for what anticipated to be a high-profile trial. So a forensic innovation that never saw court was a significant element in the trial preparation, and that was a 4-foot-tall, not-to-scale 3D model of the King Road house. And it was constructed by the FBI to aid witnesses' demonstrations of what they were describing to the jury. Now, the model was built on 4 wheels for courtroom mobility, was designed to provide jurors with a tangible representation of the crime scene, capturing the layout of the 3-story residence where the murders occurred. And the FBI's efforts involved revisiting the King Road property back in October of 2023 to gather documentation for the visual and audio exhibits, ensuring accuracy in replicating the home's structure. Now, the prosecutor, Bill Thompson, argued for the model's inclusion to assist witnesses in illustrating their testimony, emphasizing its role as a demonstrative tool rather than evidence. And despite objections from Kohberger's defense team, who raised concerns about its accuracy due to the not-to-scale design, Judge Hippler approved its use for demonstrative purposes only, which means it wasn't admitted into evidence or would not have been admitted, and the jury could not take it back into the deliberation room. The judge clarified there is a significant distinction between demonstrative exhibits or trial models, charts, things of that nature, and attempts to use things for evidentiary value in and of themselves. However, with Kohberger's plea deal, the model was never utilized in court. Anyway, the prosecutor's office later released images of the model to the press in response to public records requests, offering a rare glimpse into this forensic tool. Now, the house itself was demolished back in December of 2023 against the wishes of some of the victims' families, who viewed it as a piece of critical evidence. And the model's creation underscores the lengths to which investigators went to reconstruct the scene, paralleling Kohberger's own academic emphasis on preserving crime scene integrity. And where does this come from? Well, it comes from Kohberger's 12-page term paper completed back in May of 2022 for a criminal justice course at DeSalle University under Professor David Sipe. And it meticulously outlines the processing of a hypothetical murder scene involving a 35-year-old white female found deceased in her trailer home. Now, the paper emphasizes preventing contamination through the theory of transfer, the idea that individuals exchange traces with a scene, and advocates for tools like latent fingerprint kits, DNA swabs, and computer-aided design for precise reconstruction. Using his own words against him, weren't they? Anyway, Kohberger's focus on maintaining a snapshot in time mirrors the FBI's approach with the 3D model, highlighting a chilling alignment between his academic knowledge and the real-world investigation. Now, the paper's scenario, with its violent home invasion and physical evidence like a knife and coat hanger, bears some unsettling similarities to the Idaho case. Now, while coincidental, it raises questions about whether Kohberger's studies were purely academic or reflective of a deeper fascination. Professor Sipe, the only witness prosecutors considered calling to testify about the paper, retired after the 2023-2024 academic year, and the document released in court records has fueled speculation about Kohberger's mindset. Police records further reveal Kohberger's pre-arrest life. A student with a reported difficulties in social interaction, particularly with female students, as noted in the Washington State University faculty emails. One professor planned an intervention after Kohberger offended women, and another expressed reluctance to even bother mentoring him. And these interpersonal challenges, combined with his academic immersion in criminology, paint a complex portrait of a man now convicted of some very heinous crimes. So, some of the insights from the records have been released, specifically the academic struggles, right? Faculties were concerned about Kohberger's interaction with female students, suggests some underlying social issues that may have foreshadowed his actions. Then we have the crime scene model, right? Kohberger's term paper demonstrates a deep understanding of forensic protocols, from evidence collection to chain of custody procedures, ironically applied in the investigation against him. We also learned that Kohberger expressed an interest in becoming a police officer, but hesitated due to uncertainty, a stark contrast to his later actions. They also describe him as somewhat of a Christian-raised skeptic. Kohberger's reflections on nature during a cross-country drive add a psychological dimension to his profile as well. Then we know his post-murder behavior, where after the killings, Kohberger reportedly shifted to using cash and wearing gloves, avoiding the crime scene area, and fixating on news coverage, suggesting an awareness of the investigative techniques. And then, of course, the Idaho case, coupled with the unused 3D model, highlights a little interaction of forensic innovation and criminology education. Kohberger's academic work detailing tools like VICAP and evidence admissibility mirrors the real-world efforts to bring him to justice. The 3D model, though never used, represents a modern approach to courtroom visualization, aligning with Kohberger's own advocacy for computer-aided design and crime scene reconstruction. And as the case concludes with Kohberger's life sentence, it serves as a somewhat cautionary tale about the boundaries between studying crime and committing it. For true crime enthusiasts, the interplay of Kohberger's scholarly output, the forensic model, and the unresolved questions of motive offers a profound exploration of justice's complexities. Here's something our CrimeTalk team found when they were doing some research on some of this stuff. Photos of 1122 King Road, when it was listed for rent or for sale at the time, obviously listed as a 6-bedroom, 3-bath. We found this at Realtor.com. It's still there. So if you're interested in seeing the photographs of it was before it was obviously torn down, a little surprised that the ad is still up, but I guess nobody bothered to take it down. Well, we found it. Next on the docket, well, apparently Barry Morphew is set to attempt the Brian Kohberger defense, saying somebody else did it. So Barry Morphew, charged with murdering his wife, is possibly going to seek to utilize unidentified DNA evidence discovered at the scene to implicate an alternate perpetrator. Now, Morphew faces accusations of murdering his wife, Suzanne Morphew, who vanished on Mother's Day in 2020, with her remains being located in 2023. The autopsy determined that Suzanne succumbed to homicide by unspecified means, though no trauma was evident on her remains. Now, investigators identified a combination of wildlife tranquilizers in her bone marrow, substances for which her husband held a prescription, and so there's speculation that the defendant, Mr. Morphew, is likely going to pursue an alternate suspect defense, citing this unspecified DNA found in Suzanne's vehicle following her disappearance. Somewhat persistent element in this case has been the presence of unidentified DNA profiles on certain evidentiary items recovered initially upon her disappearance, suggesting potential involvement by another person. Now, this unidentified DNA, a partial profile located on the glove box of Suzanne Morphew's Range Rover, yielded partial matches in the combined DNA index system, which is called CODIS, to unsolved sex assault cases in Chicago, Illinois, Phoenix, Arizona, and Tempe, Arizona. Now, the profile did not correspond to Barry Morphew or Suzanne's known paramour and was classified as limited touch DNA with insufficient markers for definitive identification necessary to manually enter that into the CODIS system. So, for the defense, this evidence holds some substantial significance as it's been employed to argue the possibility of an external perpetrator, such as a sexual predator. And this contention contributed to the 2020 dismissal of the initial charges, partly attributable to prosecution's lapses in disclosures related to evidence. However, police maintain that the DNA is unrelated to the crime. Investigators reveal no direct connection to Suzanne Morphew's disappearance, with some matched cases involving unsubstantiated reports or lacking viable links. So experts characterize it as an investigative lead rather than conclusive indication of an alternate suspect, potentially resulting from innocent contact, such as by a mechanic during a vehicle maintenance, in the absence from the critical item like her bicycle or her residence. Now, prosecutors have addressed the DNA in recent proceedings, excluding direct association to the match cases and thereby reducing its evidentiary weight, while underscoring its low quality and lack of pertinence to the crime scene. Nevertheless, Morphew's counsel will be persistent in referencing the mystery DNA as a component of their alternate suspect strategy. Now, it would be better if the alternate DNA was on the bike, but it was in the car that was apparently in the garage. Anyway, as you may recall, Kohberger tried to do the same thing, but the judge denied it. Why? Because you can't just go around throwing allegations out that somebody else did it unless you can actually show that there's some true connection. And we've talked about this in the past, but basically the law is you have to be able to show that somebody actually did in fact commit the crime and you got the wrong guy and go prosecute them. Pretty tough hurdle to get over. Anyway, like I said, Kohberger tried it, didn't quite work so well. So, like I said, we'll see how it goes here in Colorado for Mr. Morphew. Now, in the Suzanne Morphew matter, her husband was apprehended back in June of 2025 in Arizona following a new indictment for her murder. Now, the arrest occurred 3 years after the original case was dismissed due to these evidentiary issues that the prosecution had mishandled. Just about everything in the case, discovery deadlines, expert deadlines. It was an abomination. And the prosecutor that was handling the case actually got disbarred over some of her conduct during Barry Morphew 1.0. Now we got Barry Morphew 2.0. Anyway, Suzanne remains were ultimately unearthed incidentally during a search for another missing person 1 year subsequent to the initial charges against Barry Morphew. Now, Mr. Morphew has steadfastly asserted his innocence since his wife's disappearance, and the enigma surrounding Suzanne Morphew's commenced when the 49-year-old mother of two was reported missing on Mother's Day in 2020. Her mountain bike and helmet were discovered in different locations near her residence, yet investigators persisted that the bicycle was deliberately discarded into a ravine given the lack of crash indicators. 1 week after her disappearance, Barry Morphew put out a video on Facebook imploring for her safe return, thereby attracting considerable public scrutiny. Prosecutors levied murder charges against him in May of 2021, only to retract those charges in 2022, mere days prior to the trial commencing. Now, a judicial ruling precluded prosecutors from summoning pivotal witnesses following recurrent violations in discovering exculpatory evidence favorable to Mr. Morphew. Now, the current prosecutor, overseen by a district prosecutor in an alternate judicial district where Suzanne remains were recovered, a local, a rural locale about 40 miles south of Morphew's residence. Now, at the discovery site, investigators identified a medicinal port utilized by Suzanne for treating lymphoma, a form of blood cancer, alongside cycling attire akin to her customary garb. A forensic anthropologist evaluating the remains and clothing conditions hypothesized that decomposition transpired elsewhere before relocation to the site as per the indictment. Now, Suzanne was reported absent by a neighbor on Mother's Day in 2020 after her daughters, Mallory and Macy, failed to contact her by phone. Her final interaction with a friend occurred on May 9th, the day authorities believe that Morphew perpetrated the killing. At the time of the disappearance, Morphew and Suzanne were the only two residing at the residence. And on May 6, Suzanne messaged her husband, quote, "I'm done. I could care less what you're up to and have been for years. We just need to figure this out civilly," end quote. Suzanne had engaged in an extramarital relationship with a former school acquaintance, a guy by the name of Jeff Libler. Anyway, Morphew contended that he departed home early on the morning of May 10th for employment in Broomfield, Colorado, just right down the street here, a 3-hour drive from where he resides there in Salida. Anyway, he asserted that Suzanne remained asleep in bed, having indicated intentions of going on a bike ride. Investigators contend that Suzanne had been deceased for several hours by that juncture. Anyway, Morphew is scheduled for a subsequent court appearance on September 2nd of 2025. And we will have to see. Obviously, he's entitled to the presumption of innocence, which will give it to him. We'll see what his attorneys will be able to do with this particular case. It is an indictment, so therefore he is not entitled to a preliminary hearing. The defense can ask the judge for a probable cause review, but all the judge can do is review then the transcripts of the grand jury proceedings to see if there was a sufficient finding of probable cause. Now, normally when a judge reviews it and they dismiss a count, it's basically because there was no evidence presented as to a multi-count indictment. So like, oh, there's no evidence presented as to count 21. That count is dismissed. Not going to happen in this particular case. The case will be set for an arraignment eventually, at which point they will have 6 months from that date to get Mr. Morphew to trial. And the breaking news. There it is, the breaking news sound here. And what do we have? That's right, we have a verdict in the case of the Colorado former dentist now, because he lost his dental license, accused of killing his wife, has been found guilty of all counts. And yesterday I predicted that the jury would go home, they would come back, and about noon they would make their decision. Well, they came out about 2 p.m. Mountain Time, and guess what? Guilty to all counts. So I missed it by about this much, but I should have known to say 1:30, 2 o'clock. Why? Because we knew they were going to figure out who's going to be the foreperson. They're going to go home. Then they're going to come back and say, all right, let's go through the evidence. And hey, the clerk has given us our request for lunch. Oh, we get a free lunch out of this. I mean, we've been getting maybe $50 a day as a juror. And we get a free lunch? Yeah, let's get a free lunch, and then we'll tell them what we decided. So needless to say, the Colorado dentist has been found guilty of murder, of poisoning his wife with protein shakes, and, as an excuse to try and get out of his marriage and not have to pay that pesky maintenance in the divorce proceedings. So Craig was accused and now convicted of killing Angela Craig over a period of 10 days in March of 2023 with arsenic, cyanide, and tetrahydrozoline, a chemical found in eye drops, poisoning not just her shakes, but also prescription capsules, and ultimately administering a fatal dose as she was lying in the hospital. Now, apparently Craig stood silent with his defense lawyers as the verdict was read out, and relatives of Angela, who were was one of 10 siblings, quietly wiped tears after 2.5 weeks of emotional testimony. Now, I told you I know all the players in this particular case. Judge Whitaker, defense attorney Lisa Moses, prosecutors, dealt with them all over the years. This was a tough case. And don't need to rehash it, but the defense attorney had a lot of stuff going on as well. But needless to say, Mr. Craig will be spending the rest of his life in custody. And it's always a good fact for the prosecution. Well, when your own daughter testifies against you, when your dad asks you to basically plant evidence in your favor, and then you try to solicit inmates to kill the lead detective in your case, somehow thinking that is going to be a good idea. It's a bad idea. Bad idea. Rule number 1, never ever tamper or harm a witness in any way. Gets seriously bad for you. Anyway, Dr. Craig, former Dr. Craig, done. He maybe could have been a done criminal of the day. We got other people for that today. The prosecutors reveal new details. That's right, the prosecutors. So in a comprehensive interview following Bryan Kohberger's guilty plea and sentencing for the 2022 murders of the 4 University of Idaho students, Latah County prosecutor Bill Thompson disclosed several previously unrevealed aspects of the investigation. These revelations shed light on Kohberger's movements during the crime, the prosecutor's evidentiary strategy, and the rationale behind accepting a plea deal that spared the defendant from the death penalty. Now, Kohberger admitted guilty, will forever be guilty, admitted to the killings earlier this month, receiving 4 consecutive life sentences without parole for the first-degree murders of Kaylee Gonzalez, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin, plus throw on another 10 years for the burglary. Now, the murders occurred on November 13th in an off-site campus residence there in Moscow, Idaho, where the victims were stabbed to death in their beds. Now, Kohberger, the criminology graduate student at the nearby Washington State University, was arrested in December of 2022 at his parents' home in Pennsylvania. Thompson emphasized that DNA evidence left on a knife sheath at the scene was pivotal, describing it as critical to the identifying and charging of Kohberger. What have I been saying all along? Remember, everybody dismissed, not everybody, a lot of people dismissed it. Oh, the DNA is not true. Everybody knew it. The lawyers knew it. Kohberger knew it. That's how they prove identification, right? Remember, they have to prove that it was Kohberger, not somebody that looked like him, not someone using his identity, but it was in fact him. DNA, the ultimate identifier. Anyway, without this genetic match, the prosecutor stated that police might have struggled to build a case or even get an arrest. So, one of the most significant disclosures centered on Dylan Mortensen, one of the 2 surviving roommates who was present in the house during the attack. Now, Mortensen, who lived on the 2nd floor with Kernodle and Chapin, reported opening her bedroom door after hearing unusual noises and encountering a masked man, later identified as Kohberger, wearing this black clothing and carrying an unidentified container. Thompson confirmed that Mortensen's accounts remained consistent across multiple interviews, including her description of the intruder's bushy eyebrows visible above his mask. Now, Thompson theorized that Kohberger likely saw Mortensen, but chose to spare her life due to escalating panic. From what Dylan described, Thompson said, "I have a hard time imagining that the killer did not see Dylan. And at that point, he'd been in the house probably longer than he planned, and he had probably killed more people than he had planned. It wouldn't surprise us that the killer was scared at that point and decided they had to leave, not knowing if law enforcement had already been called." Now, this encounter occurred as Kohberger exited via a 2nd floor sliding glass door after the killings. Now, Mortensen delivered a poignant victim impact statement at Kohberger's sentencing hearing on July 23rd, there in Ada County. Anyway, seated at the prosecution table, she detailed the enduring trauma, stating, "What he did shattered me in places I didn't know could break. It's far beyond anxiety. It's my body reliving everything over and over again." At her request, Thompson positioned himself to obstruct Kohberger's view of her during the statement, a gesture he described as honoring her strength amid profound pain. Additional forensic details revealed that only 2 victims, Gonsalves and Kernodle, sustained defensive wounds, suggesting varying levels of resistance during the attack. Now, Thompson addressed misconceptions surrounding the DoorDash delivery driver as well during the interview. The driver pulled over for an unrelated traffic stop in September of 2024, claimed to have seen Kohberger and parked near his vehicle about 4 a.m. in the morning of the murders while delivering food to Kernodle. However, surveillance footage contradicted this statement, showing they encountered a different light-colored SUV and individual. And the prosecutors had planned to call her as a witness solely to establish the timeline, not to implicate Kohberger directly. Now, the vehicle and the person she saw that she thought might have been the killer is not Mr. Kohberger, Mr. Thompson clarified. That was a different vehicle, a different person at a slightly different time. While investigators have never recovered the murder weapon or a knife sharpener that Kohberger purchased on Amazon back in March of 2022, alongside his K-bar knife and the sheath. Now, had the case proceeded to trial, the prosecution intended to present a replicated K-bar knife as demonstrative evidence to illustrate the weapon's characteristics based upon the purchased records. Brian Kohberger has his knife for 7 months, and lost it. I got this in the summer of 1988 upon graduating from Marine Corps boot camp. Haven't lost mine. Same one. Look how broken it is. And look, I'm sure there's DNA all over it. Yes, there would be. But guess what? I've never used it to kill innocent people. Now have I, Mr. Brian Kohberger? You'd never cut it as a Marine because you can't keep track of your gear. Anyway, other items found during searches included 2 identification type cards belonging to women who were former acquaintances or co-workers of Brian Kohberger from his time as a part-time security officer in Pennsylvania's Pleasant Valley School District. Both women were contacted and confirmed that no harm or threats had ever been made to them. However, they were unaware of how Kohberger obtained those items. Well, Thompson also outlined the team's trial preparation, including initial plans to call Kohberger's family members, such as his older sister Amanda or a parent, as a witness. However, they ultimately decided against it, even after securing a court ruling allowing the family's attendance. Kohberger's parents and sister attended the change of plea hearing and the sentencing hearing, where emotional victim impact statements elicited some visible reactions. Anyway, the prosecutors expressed confidence in securing convictions on all counts and pursuing the death penalty if no plea was reached. This certainly was a case where the death penalty was appropriate, Thompson asserted. And if we ended up going through trial into the penalty phase, I think under the law, it met the elements. Idaho law permits capital punishment for aggravated first-degree murders, and Thompson noted that the case aligned with statutory criteria, including multiple victims and, well, the heinous circumstances surrounding the murders. So despite this, the plea deal was accepted to ensure swift justice and closure, avoiding a protracted trial. And Thompson, who has served since 1992 and ran unopposed for a 9th term to oversee this case, emphasized professional detachment from personal views on capital punishment, accepting it as legislated policy, which is code for, I don't believe in it, but I got to follow the law. Anyway, he faced criticism from the Gonsalves and Kernodle families for bypassing a potential death sentence, but maintained that the outcome aligned with evidentiary strength and public interest. He said, quote, "We did our job," unquote. He stated regarding all this scrutiny on the case. Now, the cell phone data and surveillance further corroborated Kohberger's presence. His phone pinged near the victim's home some 23 times between July and November of 2022 during late night hours, and was deactivated during the murders, just coincidentally, and then before being reactivated in the Moscow area. Now, newly released body cam footage from the August 22 traffic stop on the Pullman-Moscow highway, capturing Kohberger admitting to not wearing his seatbelt and insisting on his honesty, right? I'm being honest, I didn't have it on, would have been used to identify or verify his identity and the vehicle and his phone number. Now, with the case resolved, Thompson plans to evaluate his future in office, having prioritized his completion. Now, the revelations provide a little deeper insight into the investigation's complexities, underscoring the role of forensic evidence and strategic decisions in achieving accountability for Mr. Kohberger. DNA, ladies and gentlemen, DNA. Would have taken them a little bit longer to get there if they didn't have it. DNA, it bears silent witness. It's there. And even the defense had no good reason why they could explain his DNA just happened to be on the knife sheath. On this little button here, it was right here on the inside, underneath the bodies, underneath a body. The defense knew they couldn't explain that away, ladies and gentlemen, and their challenges to the DNA, they couldn't dispute it. And that's why the defense, folded. Next on the docket, the sheer audacity. The Arkansas hiking horror ends with a trimmed suspect. The irony of it all. Andrew James McGann, the paragon of poor timing, gets nabbed right in the middle of a haircut at Lupita's beauty salon and barbershop. Here's how it goes down. The 28-year-old, clad in a light blue polo and khakis, lounging under a cape like he's just another guy sprucing up for the weekend. Then bam, the Arkansas State Police swoop in, yank off the barber's cape, slap on the cuffs, and haul him away without so much as a peep of resistance. Patrons and stylists, well, they just stare in stunned silence, probably wondering if the next time comes with a side of drama. The spectacle, caught on surveillance and now etched in infamy, ties directly to the brutal double slaying at the Devil's Den State Park. But let's pivot to the real heart-wrencher here. Clinton David Brink, who was 43, and his wife, Kristen Amanda Brink, who was 41, turned a family hike into a desperate bid for heroism. These poor souls, fresh from relocating from South Dakota to Arkansas, were out exploring the Ozark Mountains rugged trails on July 26 with their two young girls, aged 7 and 9. And what would have been a wholesome adventure developed into a nightmare, fueled when they crossed paths with McGann, allegedly a complete stranger, with a knife in hand. The police paint a gut-wrenching picture. Clinton gets attacked first, stabbed in what officials dub a completely random frenzy. Kristen, bless her fierce maternal instincts, doesn't bolt for the hills. No, she hustles her daughters to safety, stashing them away from the chaos before circling back like a one-woman rescue squad to aid her husband. Tragically, that's where she meets her end, stabbed alongside her husband. The girls, physically unscathed, but undoubtedly scared for life, now in the care of relatives. And it's stuff of parental nightmares, sacrificing everything to shield your kids from a monster who, as it turns out, had no beef with anyone in particular. How about that for selfless? In a world gone mad, these parents emerged as the unsung guardians. Their final act, a sarcastic slap at fate's cruel randomness. Now, McGann, for his part, didn't exactly play hard to get. He got arrested about 4:57 on July 30th, and he now faces 2 counts of capital murder, with his counts to appear in court today. It is reported, but we'll give him the presumption of innocence, that he confessed. DNA from the scene matched this, shocker, and a search of his digs turned up incriminating evidence. Oh, and he's picked up some injuries during the scuffle as well. A little poetic justice, perhaps. Now, the police emphasize that the randomness, no prior connection, no targeting the kids, just a lone wolf with a blade. Over 500 tips poured in, but they're confident he is the only suspect. Until, of course, the true crime world gets a hold of it, and I'm sure they will soon say he's been framed. Now for the suspect's backstory, because nothing screams trustworthy like a former teacher with spotless adult rap sheet until you dig a little bit. Now, McGann's taught in an Oklahoma district until May, passing all those rigorous background checks like a pro. He resigned amid whispers of classroom mismanagement and some dodgy judgment, though an investigation cleared him outright of any misconduct. misconduct towards any student. Now, a parent's complaint from 2022 flagged inappropriate vibes around young girls, leading to the administration to put him on leave and his eventual exit. He was sent to start fresh at the Springdale Public School in Arkansas, but never got the chance. Now, lucky for the kids there, as the superintendent noted with palpable relief, extending sympathies to the Brinks while keeping mum on the details. Now, in the end, the Devil's Den, a sprawling 2,500-acre haven of trails and rocks about 140 miles northwest of Little Rock, remains tainted by the senseless saga. The trailhead still shuttered as the probe wraps up, but one thing is clear amid the sarcasm of a haircut interrupted arrest. It's the Brinks' valiant scramble to save their daughters that cuts deepest. A bitter reminder of humanity's highs and lows in the face of complete and utter random violence. Those parents are doing what parents do, ladies and gentlemen. They protect their children. Those people are heroes. They are saints. And McGann's entitled to the presumption of innocence, but the worst things should probably happen to him. That is the horror of everybody. Somebody attacking your family for no apparent reason whatsoever. Unbelievable.